I have to say that I really appreciate all the speakers. And what I've learned from my grandmother is this, is that when someone is talking to you and sharing with you, they're sharing a part of who they are, and that we need to respect that. And I'm not quite like Simple Yon, but I think I talked quite a bit. And she said, how are you going to think about what you heard if this is going all the time? How are you going to think about what you've seen if this is going all the time? And so we were taught at a very young age to listen. And I can tell you, as the years went by, my grandmother was getting older and older. I even recorded her. And she said, why are you doing that? I shared everything with you. I said, I want my children and grandchildren to hear your voice in your stories in our language. I said, I'm scared I'm going to forget. She said, if you hear something 4 times, and if you're listening here and with your heart, it will stay with you forever. In that notion that we're coming together with such an important topic. You know, one person, it's hard to get things done. But Chief Sitting Bull said, let's put our minds and our hearts together and build a future for our children, a good future. So with that, I'm going to invite Kimberly Murray, Independent Special Interlocutor, to share a few words. Hi, to Ian.
Sego, Grego, Skinagoa, Kimberly Murray, Yungats, Ganyegahaga, Ni'i, Ganistatage. Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see some of you. The light's really bright. I'm Kimberly Murray. I'm the Independent Special Interlocutor. I'm Mohawk of Ganistatage, and I'm very honored that you've all taken time out of your busy lives to be here tonight with us. Nawe to Aaron, or should I say, speaks too much? Oh, Stuart. Oh, yeah, where's Aaron? Aaron, I can't see you. Aaron, there you are. Nawe. Aaron, I take that back. And I want to say thank you to you as well for the songs, because I know that you participated in that, Stuart, for the songs that you brought and for the prayers that you brought to start our dinner this evening, and the songs and the prayers that you did for the empty chair and for the spirits of the little ones, as we invite them to come into our gatherings with us so that they know all the work that you are all doing to help find them, to help them journey home to their communities. So I thank you for that. But I also thank you for those songs and that prayer for all of us and for the survivors here. An elder told me not too long ago, remember to pray for us too. Remember to pray for us too as we do this work. I want to say, Nawe Harchikasium, to Councilmember Stuart Gonzalez, talks too much, Chief Jennifer Thomas, and Chief Wayne Sparrow, who I know wasn't able to come this evening, for your warm welcome to your unceded territory. As is custom in the host nations, I lift my hands up. I lift my hands up to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in deepest respect and appreciation for your warm welcome that you always give to visitors in your territory. I'm learning. Hai Kepcha. I was told that means thank you all for your kindness. My people, where I come from, we commence important meetings by giving thanks to all of creation, including the waters, Mother Earth, the plants, the stars, Grandfather Sun, and Grandmother Moon. And I am thankful for these today and every day. Your lands here, your water here are beautiful. Even the rain which continues to bring life to all of creation and reminds us of the renewal that is coming. I want to say thank you to Dr. Lavinia Brown for lighting the kulik and for bringing ceremony and traditions of the North to the Salish Sea. Marcy Joe for joining us and providing important perspective from the Métis and about Métis survivors and your history and your involvement in Indian residential schools. I, of course, want to acknowledge and give thanks to National Chief, and thank you, National Chief, for that medicine that you gave to me at the beginning or at the dinner. I really appreciate that, and I carry that in my pocket. So miigwech for that. I want to also acknowledge Dene Chief, and thank you for meeting with me earlier today. I always learn so much from you and your teachings that you give, so thank you for that. I want to also say nawe and thank you to Kupi Wilson for your words. And I want to tell you in front of this room of all these people, that day when you gave me that crystal at the Assembly of First Nations meeting in July, I carry that crystal in my bundle. It meant so very much to me, the warmth that you showed me without knowing me. And that was like, I think maybe 2 weeks into my job. And so I want to let you know that really touched me, and I carry that crystal with me everywhere I go. I also want to acknowledge Kupi Casimir. I want to acknowledge you for the support you've given our office. And I think I want to say on behalf of all of Canada and the communities that I've spoken to, thank you. Thank you for bringing these atrocities to light at the scale that you did with your community. And I thank you for the continued support that your team provides to our office, and always know if there's anything, and I see your team over there. Hi, team over there. I tried to come over and say hello earlier. If there's anything we can do as you continue your work, we're here for you. I want to also acknowledge City Councillor and Acting Mayor Rebecca Bly. Yes, Vancouver. Yes, Vancouver, I love what you've done. I'm totally going off script here. But and I know Commissioner Wilson, who's sitting here, will agree with me, Vancouver was one of the leading cities that were committed to reconciliation during the Truth and Reconciliation years. We wrote about it, and we always propped them up and said, look what they're doing in Vancouver. I know nothing's perfect. And I'm sure some of you in the room can say, there's probably more they can do. But I want to acknowledge the good work that you've done as a city. It's really important that municipalities participate in reconciliation. And we have seen that it's at that local level where the best and most important reconciliation is happening. So thank you for your words. So, before tomorrow, when we will explore and discuss the complexities of sovereignty over our records and knowledge, let us take the time this evening to get to know each other. And with all the chatter I've been hearing all night, I know that's what you've been doing, and that really makes me warm in my heart. It's important to share a meal and hopefully have a laugh or two amongst ourselves. Many of you have traveled from far, far away to be here. And it's important, it's really important that we rest from our journeys as we traveled here and that we nourish our bodies. Tomorrow and Wednesday, they're going to be long days. They're going to be long days. And they will be heavy at times, as National Chief pointed out. They're going to be heavy, and thank you to the First Nations Health Authority for the supports that you're providing over the next couple of days. But these discussions that we will have are vitally important. They're vitally important to help with the recovery of the missing children. As has mentioned, it was only a few days ago that we heard from yet another community. This time in Treaty 4 territory, Star Blanket Cree Nation brought to light more truths to the world and shared the preliminary results of their efforts to locate unmarked burials at the Capel Indian Residential School. As we bear witness to their sacred work, I am thankful. I am thankful for the survivors who held fast to the truths and the families and the communities that continue to seek resolution regarding their missing family members. You're not alone. Surrounding you right now are people who understand, who grieve, who rage, and who are taking action. They're taking action for the future generations. And they're taking action so that the future generations will know how to ensure that the colonial genocide never happens again. And as I speak about taking action, we are so very fortunate to have Holith Weltel Grand Chief Stephen Point here to provide a keynote address this evening. Grand Chief Point has taken action in many, many forms, often leading the way, whether it be as the Chancellor of the University of British Columbia, or as the 28th Lieutenant Governor of BC, as a provincial court judge, or as the Chief Commissioner of British Columbia Treaty Commission. Thank you, Grand Chief, for joining us this evening. We are so privileged and honored to have you share some words with us tonight. We know that we have the answers right here in this room. Let us share, let us listen, as Gwen reminded us, and let us learn. The spirits of the children are with us, and they're counting on us. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Holith Weltel Grand Chief Stephen Point to the stage. Grand Chief. I tried my best.
Thank you very much. We are in different times, ladies and gentlemen. When I started in politics in 1975, I was the former executive member to the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. At a conference like this, you would have heard from men. We have been hearing from women leaders. Let's give them a round of applause. The times are a-changing, and it's a welcome change. When I was the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia in 2010, the world came to Vancouver for the Winter Olympics. I, among many other dignitaries, were waiting for the reception, just like we are tonight. And who walks into the room? Arnold Schwarzenegger, Governor of California. As it turns out, he's not as tall as he looks on television. Gwen and Sean Atleo went running over to get their picture taken. He was just a little taller than both of them. And I seen the governor walk across over to the chief's table where Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Inuksuk, and Squamish were sitting. And he kindly stopped and acknowledged them and shook their hands. And he thanked them for hosting the world. And then he came over to see me because I'd asked if I could have a photograph taken with him. And as he approached me, I put my hand out to shake his hand, and I said, "Thank you very much for acknowledging our First Nations leaders and the contribution that they're making to the World Olympics." And he said to me, and he looked me right in the face and said, "Well, of course, they were here before you were." I looked at him, I'm not going to correct the Arnold Schwarzenegger. But he didn't know I was First Nation, right? I dare say that Indigenous people, not only in British Columbia, but throughout the world, are invisible. We were in Europe for 21 days cultural festival, and they'd asked us to represent Canada at this international cultural festival. When I got there, I said to the other dancers that we'd brought, who would they have sent if they didn't send First Nations? Would they have sent the Scots? The Italians? Tim Hortons? Hockey Canada? Culturally, who represents Canada? What is our culture? In other words, this was the idea that I had. We were in the lineup waiting, and the dance troupe got there from Africa, from Central Africa, and they were drumming and dancing, and they all had green cloth on. They were beautiful, beautiful people. And they seen us with our feathers on. We had our regalia on, standing there holding our drums. Some of us had red paint on our face. And they spoke French through our interpreter, and they started crying, and they started touching my children's faces. And they said, "We were told at home that you were all dead." They were saying that's what they were taught in school. But here you are. You're alive. And the very truth is that the Indigenous people, that we are here today after the impacts of colonialism, the arrival of diseases that killed 95% of our people, 30 million people in this country, from smallpox. I was doing my research at law school, and I read the diary of one of the colonial land commissioners, Peter O'Reilly. And in it, he talks about Dr. Helmick, one of the first doctors that arrived here in British Columbia from New Zealand. And the historic reality is that British Columbia was not the first colony that the Europeans arrived at in their journey around the world. They had gone to New Zealand, and they understood clearly the impacts of foreign diseases on Indigenous populations. They were just developing the inoculation process for smallpox. Helmicken himself had written a paper about how they crushed up the scabs taken off people who had smallpox and inoculated those individuals with that powder. They needed Indigenous laborers in Victoria in those days to unload the ships. And so they inoculated some of those First Nations people. But there were camps of Indigenous people all around Victoria in those days, people who'd come to Victoria to do trading. And they had temporary shelters. And the government made it against the law for them to be there. They had to have a permit to stay in Victoria. Governor Douglas's wife, his own wife, had to have a permit because she was Cree. The rest of the Indians were told to leave, to go back home. And many of them died on the way. They never made it home. And those that did infected the families that they had gone home to. What do you call that? When the government sends people home knowing that they're going to spread a disease that they have no protection from. It's called genocide. I was reading the memoirs of Thomas Crosby, one of the ministers of the Anglican Church who used to come to our small community at Scout Hill. In it, he talks about the annihilation of Indigenous people from alcohol. How the whiskey traders would come to the villages and sell the cheap whiskey made sometimes from kerosene. And how intoxicated the Indians got. How many millions of our people died from alcohol and are still dying from drugs today. And they laugh at us as drunken people. Well, you can't break a man's leg one day and blame him for limping the next, can you? We not only suffered the indignity of being wiped out by foreign diseases and then made intoxicated by their liquor. We suffered the indignity of the loss of our homelands, placed on small reservations and forced to reside there. One of my legal colleagues in Victoria wrote a paper of all of the Indians that were being arrested at the turn of the century in Vancouver. Why were they arrested? Because they did not have a letter of permission to leave the reservation that they were required to have by the Federal Department of Indian Affairs. We were required an exit permit to leave our communities. We weren't allowed to gather in groups more than 3 or 4. We weren't allowed to hire a lawyer to protect ourselves, defend our rights. And then the Indian Act was amended again to make and prohibit us from dancing and singing in our homes. My own elder, Richard Malloway, was arrested at age 17 for dancing in his home. When they took our land away, we became the poorest people in our own country. And we're still impoverished. as they milk this country of its resources, its trees, its minerals. And they call us welfare recipients. As a judge, I became very aware that on Monday morning, that was Indigenous Day in many of the provincial courts in this country. In many of the northern communities, all of the people that showed up for Monday morning were Indigenous. When I sat in Terrace, I saw the 30 students who used to come to the mall every day. I finally went to the school and asked, why are these kids not in school? It was after nominal roll. They'd already been counted, and the government had already paid for them, $5,000 per head. After that, they were asked to leave the school. Colonialism was also about assimilation, forced assimilation, deculturalization in residential schools. This idea of taking Indians out of the Indian to eliminate the Indian problem was official government policy. And as we've learned through the many, many studies done on our people throughout this country, thousands of our children died in these places. I was talking to my aunt just a few months ago, and she said, you know, they're going to come and ask me to be interviewed again. I said, what about, Auntie? She said, because my brother never came home from residential school. I said, are you going to talk to them? She said, no. What difference is it going to make? I tell my story and I tell my story, and nothing changes. How many of our people are broken, have lost faith, not only in the governments and the churches, but have lost faith even in our own leadership to bring about positive change. And when they stopped putting children on buses by the RCMP and the trucks to haul them off the residential schools, they began removing them from our communities and placing them in foster homes by the thousands, sending them often to Europe and other parts of the world, where they grew up in a culture they didn't understand, where often they were forced to be laborers and to hide in a basement while other people were there to visit them. In many, many cases, abused physically and sexually. We just buried a young brother of ours a few days ago, who during the 60s scoop stayed in 17 foster homes. He didn't survive that system. Colonialism is about all of those stories. Colonialism has had an impact in many, many ways. And in the words of George Manuel, one of the greatest leaders that I've ever met, he said that you and I, all of us, have every reason to celebrate today, because we have survived. We have survived. But the reason that you've come here today and for the next few days is to honor those many, many children who did not. The voiceless children without dignity buried. You know, we've been compensated now for many things by the government. I got a letter the other day from a local resident in Chilliwack. She delivered the letter in person to me. She said, "Why aren't you leaders talking about these 215 children that have been found? Why are you being quiet about this? Are you waiting for more compensation from the government?" I don't think the general public understands everything that Indigenous people have been through. Just like Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't know I was First Nation. I think it's been a government policy to suppress that information. You and I have an obligation. And it's not about coming to a fancy hotel and staying for a few days to listen to some speakers. You and I have an obligation to become the ambassadors and the voice for these children. Because they've done something for us here in Canada, something that hasn't been done since Oka, since Gustafson Lake. The Indian agenda is now at the top of the government's list. They've appointed a special rapporteur, after all. We have an opportunity and we should take it. The story has to be told loud. The story has to be told over and over again. There needs to be a Mount Rushmore of monuments built to memorialize these children. Because by God, it should never have happened to begin with. And I hope it never happens again. Thank you very much.
Wow. I knew that you all stayed for a reason, and that was to listen to Grand Chief Point share his words with us this evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's a call to action in its own way to remind us of our responsibilities for the voiceless children. I personally will do everything I can to give voice to those children, and I know that all of you in this room are willing to do that as well. So I want to say now, Miigwech, thank you. Now I don't have it written in front of me how to say it in your language. Haichka, thank you so much. I'm learning. I'm going to get better by the end of these 3 days. And please, everyone, join me in thanking Grand Chief again. And if I can offer you this gift of our appreciation. Sorry to make you come back.